Okay, good morning. It's Parshas Vayera. We're going to do the first Aliyah in Parshas Vayera, and I call it the lessons from the angel's visit. So we're on page 78 in your Chumashim. It's one of the best known narratives in the entire Tanakh and certainly in Chumash Bereshis. So let's see what we can learn. Vayera elav Hashem belonei mamrei v'hu yoshe pesach ha'oel kechom hayom. And God appeared too in the plains of Mamre, while to Abraham, though his name is not mentioned, Hashem appeared to him in the plains of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He raises his eyes and he sees three men standing right near him. He sees and he goes running towards them and he bows to them and he says, Adonai, and he says to them, or he says, we don't know it's to them, but he says, Adonai, my Lord, if I find favor in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant. Please don't leave me. Stay here. Let some water be brought, and you'll wash your feet. And you'll lean behind the tree. You'll have good hospitality. And he says, I will fetch a morsel of bread for you, and that will sustain you. And then go on. After you've eaten, then you'll be able to pass on and continue on your way. And they said, do so just as you have said. Pasuk Vav. Vaymaher Avraham ohela el Sarah, and Avraham rushed to the tent of Sarah, his wife. Vayomer Mahari shlosh siim kemach solas lushiva siugos. And he says, hurry, make 3 sa'as of meal, fine flour, and knead and make cakes. Then Avram ran to the cattle. He took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the youth who were hurried to prepare it. Pasuk 8, Pasuk Ches. He took cream and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed these before them. He stood over them beneath the tree and they ate. He served them. Vayamru elav aye Sarah ishtecha. Now the 3 visitors turning say, where's your wife Sarah? Vayomer, and he answers, Inei ba'oel, she's in the tent. Vayomer shov ashuv elecho ka'es chayav inei ben l'Sarah ishtecha v'Sarah shamas pesach oel vu acharav. And he said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. So she heard the whole conversation. Now Avram and Sarah were old at this time, well on in years, and the manner of women had ceased to be with Sarah. And Sarah laughed at herself and said, after I have withered, shall I again have delicate skin? And my husband is also old. So how is this all going to happen? Then Hashem said to Avram, why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, shall I in truth bear a child, though I have aged? Pasuk Yudalid, Pasuk 14. Is anything beyond Hashem? At this appointed time, I will return to you right now at this time, and Sarah will have a son. And Sarah denied it and said, I did not laugh, for she was frightened. But he said, no, you laughed indeed. Okay, that's the story in this first Aliyah. And the Rav probes this first Aliyah and wants to know, tell me, is this just a story of a one moment in Avraham's life, or is there much more to be gained from this story? And the Rav understands that this is not just a moment in Avraham's life, rather it's an event that has left the Jewish community with an important direction and ethical lessons. And what the Rav is going to do, as the Rav always does, he doesn't look through the entire pasuk like Rashi. He doesn't go pasuk by pasuk, word by word. That's not what the Rav is doing. We're going to see a gestalt view, and the Rav wants to learn the lessons from the angel's visit and how that impacts on us to this very day. So let's begin at the very first pasuk. He feels that this pasuk is profound in that which is absent in this pasuk. Take a look. Vayera elav Hashem be'ilonei mamre, v'hu yoshev pesach ohel kechom hayom. Now the Lord appeared to him. The Rav notes two oddities in this pasuk that he believes are filled with crucial information. The first oddity is that God appeared to Avram 3 times prior to this occasion. This is not the first time that Avram has a visit, has a nevuah, if you will, as prophecy from Hashem. In each of the other occasions, if you take a look at Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Zayin, or Perek Tezvav, Pasuk Aleph, or Perek Yud Zayin, Pasuk Aleph, in all 3 of those cases, let's just go back. Let's see, Perek Yud Beis, let's go to the first, Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Zayin. It's on page 56. Perek Yud Beis Pasuk Zayin. Vayera Hashem el Avram Vayomer. Just this is the first of the 3 previous times that Hashem had appeared to Avraham. And what do we see here? Vayera Hashem el Avraham Vayomer. And Hashem appeared to Avraham Vayomer. And he said, in all of these 3 cases that we listed, in all of them, Avraham has Hashem appeared to him, but Hashem says Vayomer. Hashem just doesn't appear to Avraham. Hashem says, oh, he's an introduction, Vayomer. And he spoke, and God spoke to Avraham. That word, let's take a look in this Perek Yud Ches Pasuk Aleph, page 78. Vayera elav Hashem be'ilonei ramei. Where is the Vayomer? Where is God? God is not opening his mouth. God is not speaking, if you will. It's a prophetic experience. Hashem has to speak, doesn't he? That's question number 1. Where is the Vayomer? And in each of the 3 previous times, each one says God appeared, Vayomer, and God said, and God speaks. And the second oddity is that Avraham is not referred to by name. It says Vayera elav. It should have said Vayera Hashem el Avraham Vayomer, right? That's the way it should have been constructed. No, elav is a pronoun. Who's referred to? Why isn't Avraham's name mentioned? And these 2 factors, again, no Vayomer and no Avraham's name. And the Rav explains that this is not a regular prophetic moment that Avraham is having, like he had in the 3 previous times that I mentioned in Perek Yud Beis, and Perek Tezvav, and Perek Yud Zayin. Rashi quotes the Gemara in Baba Metzia at 86b that says that this was the 3rd day after the Bris Milah. Avraham just had undergone the Bris Milah in the previous parsha, and this is the 3rd day. And the Gemara in Baba Metzia says the 3rd day is the most painful after a Bris Milah. And Hashem does what now? Hashem comes to visit Avraham because he was performing Bikur Cholim. He was performing a visit to make Avraham feel better. Avraham was suffering from pain. So Avraham is being comforted while he's sick. In other words, Avraham was in need of a friendship. Avraham was in need of a visit. That's what Bikur Cholim is. Bikur Cholim is a friend to friend. And God came as a friend. That's what the Rav understands is happening here based on this Gemara. And friendship, as the Rav notes, requires no words. It's just your presence that counts. In the words of the Rav, and I quote him, if 2 individuals are close friends, sharing a sense of intimacy and companionship, one not need to have a message to deliver in order to walk into another's home. You don't have to say a word when it's friendship. You just come. Your being is the most important. The highest form of friendship does not require words, the Rav notes. So why isn't Vayomer here? Because it's a different type of visit. In the three previous, where Avram was having prophetic visions, Hashem was talking to Avram in a real prophetic experience. This one is not the same. Here, it's not a master and servant relationship, it's friendships, a friend to friend. After Vayera, there is no Vayomer because it's a friend to friend. And there's a development here in the relationship between Avraham and Hashem. It's not Avraham Avdi. It's not Avraham, my servant. Hashem is not relating to Avraham in this story as he's the master and Avraham is the servant. Rather, after Bris Milah, the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Avraham is transformed, and it becomes what Yeshayahu in Perek Mem Aleph Pasuk Ches calls Avraham Ohavi. Avraham becomes his beloved. It's a friend. Avraham is transformed after the Milah, not to just an Eved Hashem, but he's an Ohev Hashem. He's an Ohavi. He is my friend. After Avraham performs the Milah, a bris is established between two friends, if you will. The relationship is friendship. And that's why the Rav notes the Torah removes any conversation between Avraham and Hashem. And this also explains why a love is used rather than Avraham by name. A love is far from a formal expression. It's just the opposite of a formal expression. Formal usage would require Avraham's name to be mentioned. And Avram's name is not being mentioned. Why? When it comes to friendship, is formality important? Just the opposite. Formality stifles friendship. You don't have, when you're dealing with friends, you don't use titles. You use first names, right? Or you don't even use names when you're speaking. It's just a conversation that easily goes. And that's what is happening in this pasuk, because the Rav notes the first lesson in this story is that it is not a typical prophetic experience that Avram is having. Avram is having a visitor, Hashem, as a friend. Be'elonei Mamre, Vayera elav Hashem, be'elonei Mamre, in the plains of Mamre. So everybody asks this question, right? Why are we told that it took place in the plains of Mamre? Why is that important a feature to this story? What are we being told? So Rashi quotes a medrash that says Mamre advised Avraham pertaining to performing Bris Milah. Mamre, Avraham was concerned. Avraham wasn't sure, could I go through Milah or not? Because he was afraid that he would lose friendships as soon as he would perform Milah. It would make him different than everyone else. He would have a covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that would separate him from the world. And Mamre turns, according to the Medrash, and tells Avram, go ahead, do the Milah. I'm not going to leave you. I'm your friend. I'm going to remain with you. And because the Medrash, Rashi quotes, the Medrash says, Mamre is rewarded. Mamre is mentioned by name. The Elonei Mamre, because he gave that advice to Avraham to go through the Milah. And the Rav explains the Medrash as follows. He notes that Avram really sensed a concern, and it was justified. In the past, people came to Avraham constantly asking him for his consultation. He was the advisor. People lined up, if you will, at the front of his tent to speak to Avram. He had lines and lines of people, if you can imagine in your head, your vision of people lining up to speak to Avraham. And now we see what happens. Nobody's there. How do I know when nobody's there? He has to go out and sit at the front of his tent because nobody is coming. Why? Because he performed the Milah. The Milah changed everything. This is what he was worried about. And Mamre said, don't worry. And Avram had a good reason to worry. But why would Avram have thought that the Milah would change his relationship with his neighbors? That's the question that we must ask, right? And so the Rav explained that Milah symbolizes that the Jewish people have a unique and singular historic destiny. Initially, and we talked about this last week, initially, and I talked about it in the drasha on Shabbos as well. Initially, Avram thought he had a universal mandate to convert the world to monotheism. That's what he thought. Go and change the world's opinion about the deity. Convince them there's a monotheistic God. And he thought that was my job. I'm the father of a multitude of nations. My job is to convince universally the world to adopt monotheism. And the Milah, however, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's telling Avraham, no, that's not your job. Your job is a much more confined, it's a confined relationship. It's develop your family, develop that family into a nation, the covenantal community, the Am Segula. That's what I want you to do, Avram. That's the change. But by doing that, what happens? The Jewish people, if you will, Avraham representing the Jewish people at that time, as we're evolving, the Jewish people is going to be a very lonely nation. And isn't that what happens? Right? We become the people. Am levadad yishkan. Exactly. As the Chumash is going to tell us in the Chumash Bamidbar. Am levadad yishkan in Parshas Balak. We're the nation that lives and dwells alone. But Avram sensed this. He says, up until that point in Avram's life, he thought he had one job, to convince the world that Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the God. And now with Milah, he realizes, whoa, my function is a totally different one. My function is to change my family, to create a family into a nation. And it's going to be Am Segula. And by doing that, I'm going to lose my relationships with the other nations. Should I go through the Milah? Wow, should I do this? And Mamre says, yes, you do that. That's your job. That's why it says Be'elonei Mamre. That's what the Medrash Rashi is alluding to. In other words, that Avram sensed this was going to happen. And the whole story, now look at this whole opening pasuk. Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei Mamre. First point, Hashem comes to Avraham differently than a regular prophetic experience. Hashem comes to Avraham as a friend. He's doing Bikur Cholim, right? Where is he? Where is this number one happening? The Elonei Mamre. It's on the third day after Milah. And Avram knew darn well that this was going to change who he was and his function. And Mamre is the one who's telling him, no, continue. Don't worry. Go through it. And he is credited by being mentioned. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent. The word Yoshev in the Torah doesn't have nikudot. Yoshev is in the present tense, sitting. He was sitting. But it also can be read without nikudot, Yoshav, right? In the past tense. He sat. It doesn't have the vav. It could be read Yoshav. Rashi quotes a very strange medrash. Listen to what Rashi says. Abraham was sitting and wanted to get up, but God told him, remain seated and I shall stand. And the fact that you remain seated symbolizes something that will happen in the future, the Medrash notes, noting that judges, Dayanim in a Bet Din, must sit and accept testimony when the others render their decision, right? Rashi then continues, and Hashem said, I shall stand, and the judges will be seated. As the verse states, Elokim nitzav ba'adat kel. God stands in the congregation of God. In the midst of the judges, he judges. In other words, he's the judge. Who's standing? Hashem. And what are the Dayanim doing? Sitting. The Rav asks, well, what does this Rashi mean by quoting this Medrash? It's an interesting thing, right? He's saying, no, you sit and I'm standing. Hashem says, Avram, you sit, v'yoshav. In other words, sit. Don't get up. I'm the one who's going to be standing. What's going on here? When an important, dignified person comes to visit, what does protocol demand? You stand, right? You stand out of respect. That's what a host does when he stands at the door. A host is the one who stands at the door and he greets the guests. HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to visit Avram. So what does Avram do? He jumps up and he stands, right? He's greeting Hashem. What does Hashem say to Avraham? You are making a mistake, Avraham. You consider yourself to be the host, and I am the guest. Hashem says to Avram, this is how the Rav understands this medrash. The opposite is true. I'm the host, and you are the guest. I'm receiving you. You think it's your tent? It's not your tent. It's my tent. This is my tent. Nothing in this world is truly yours. Everything remains mine, so remain seated. That's what the Medrash is saying. The Medrash is teaching us a crucial lesson. The Medrash is teaching us that we think we can be the host, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is reminding us through this Medrash that Rashi's using that who's really the host? Who's always the host? Yeah. Hashem. We're the guest. We're the guest. Hashem is the host. One second. The same idea is true in every courtroom. In every courtroom. Judaism, the Rav notes, has never accepted the concept of one person judging another. How can a human being who's just as imperfect as the one accused that is sitting in the dock render judgment on him? As the pasuk in Devarim Perek Aleph, pasuk Yitzayin says, judgment belongs to God, not man. Man is not capable of judging any human being. Yet the Torah indeed allows human judgment. Why does it allow human judgment? Because if it didn't, there would be anarchy, right? We have to judge. We have to have. But the judge must always remember that he's only an agent of whom? Of Hashem. He's a messenger of Hashem. Who's the real judge? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's another lesson that's being taught. Lesson number one was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's the host. Lesson number two, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's the judge. We're not the judge. We're not to really judge at all. This reminds us in our lives that we are just guests in God's world. He is the host. He remains standing. We're invited to sit. That's all we're invited to. Then the Rav offered a totally different understanding of this pasuk via another medrash. There's another explanation of this pasuk via another medrash, and that medrash is based on a Gemara in Yuma Lamed Hey Amud Beis 35b. Listen to the medrash. The rabbis taught, the poor, the rich, and the wicked come before the heavenly court. They say to the poor man, why did you not occupy yourself with Torah? If he says, I was poor and I was concerned about my sustenance, I had no time. I had to worry about my sustenance. I was poor. They will say to him, were you poorer than Hillel? Were you poor Hillel, the famous Hillel? He was poor and he still made time. Then the Gemara goes on. They ask the rich man, why did you not occupy yourself with Torah? If he says, I was rich and preoccupied with my possessions, I was busy. I was a big businessman. You know, I had to deal with my real estate and all my possessions. They say to him, were you wealthier than Elazar ben Chasom? Elazar ben Chasom was a Gemara's figure that was extremely wealthy. Yet he made time. And they asked the wicked finally, and why did you not occupy yourself with the Torah? If he says, I was good looking, preoccupied with my evil inclination, they will say to him, were you better looking than Yosef HaTzadik? Yosef also. And he made time. Thus, Hillel convicts the poor, Elazar ben Chasom convicts the rich, and Yosef convicts the wicked. One of the three angels was sent to destroy Sodom. Now follow what's going on here. Were the inhabitants of if the inhabitants of Sodom were to argue that their evil was simply a result of the environment they lived, what is this pasuk going to tell us? The pasuk is going to tell us God would point to Avraham. Avraham also lived under these circumstances. He also lived in a society that was wicked. And yet, look at what he did. He opened his home to guests. He demonstrated righteousness. He indeed influenced a cadre of followers who shared the same values as he did. Avraham is going to be the judge on whom? On Sodom. That's what's happening here. Who's judge? Who Yoshe Pesacho, like a judge. What do you mean like a judge? So the Rav points, Avraham becomes the foil for Sodom, which is going to be the next story, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Avraham becomes, that's what this is in other words, the Rav understands this pasuk as a pasuk that is explaining what the next story is all going to be. This is the introduction to the next story. Abraham becomes the one who's sitting. What do you mean sitting? He becomes the judge. He becomes the judge of Sodom.
Look,
That he becomes, right? He becomes the example of what Sodom should have been. Sodom has no excuse because Abraham acted the way he did. Okay, next pasuk. Everybody understands that this pasuk, how the Rav parsed it and beautifully, so many different crucial ideas, right? Number one, again, that Hashem did not come to Abraham like just a simple prophetic vision. Hashem came to Abraham like a friend visiting. When you come as a friend, you do not need words. You just need to be present. You just need to be there. That was lesson one. Then lesson two, the Elav. Why isn't Abraham's name mentioned? Because when friends see friends, protocol goes out the window. It stifles a relationship. And this is a relationship of friends. And why do we mention Mamre, right? Because Mamre suggested, consulted with Abraham, go ahead with the Milah. Why was Abraham worried about the Milah? Because he knew it was going to transform him. People would avoid him. The nations would move away from the Jew, which is exactly what happens, right? Historically, it's already happening here. So he's mentioned Mamre because he was a loyal friend. He was a loyal friend, even though Abraham performed the Milah. And the Rav noted all of the lessons that was teaching us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Abraham, you sit, I stand. You're not the host. You think you're the host. You're not the host. You're not the host. Hashem is the host in everything. And the last point, this pasuk is an introduction to the next story, which is all about Sodom. How Hu Yoshe Pesach Ha'oel is an expression of judgment. Always the courts were at the front of the gate, if you will, at the front, right? The judges always sat, if you will, at the gate of the city. So this is demonstrative of he's sitting and judging. How is Avram a judge here? Avram is a judge because he's going to be used as the foil against Sodom. Sodom has no excuse for why they acted such a cruel fashion. That's what happens in this pasuk. Okay, to continue on, then the Rav notes in pasuk base, not pasuk base. He doesn't say anything on pasuk base. The pasuk base tells us that the three visitors come, right, and he runs to do what? To welcome them. He's doing hachnasas arachim. Pasuk gimel, vayomar, and who's speaking? Abraham. Adonai. Who's Adonai? One word is going to discern how we understand this pasuk. Who's he saying? Adonai. Adonai can mean Hashem. Adonai. Hashem, the master of all masters. Or no, Adonai here can mean he's turning to the visitors and he's saying, masters, if you will. He's giving them kavod. And he's saying, if I find favor in your eyes, do not leave me. Stay. Is he turning to Hashem and putting God on hold? Because he was talking to God. Remember, Pasuk Aleph, he was talking to God. Pasuk Beis, while he was talking to God, what happened? Three visitors. So he didn't have to decide. What does he do, right? What is Avram to do? And it depends upon how you interpret this one word, Adonai. Is he putting Hashem on hold, or is he speaking to the human beings and say, I want to be hospitable to you. Please don't leave me. Let me be hospitable. And the Gemara in Shavuos, Lamed Hey, Amid Beis, offers both possibilities. In other words, Avraham had a dilemma. How does he continue with while he's doing and experiencing the most exalted experience man can have, namely a conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself? Does he put God on hold, or does he run to the visitors? What's going on? How does he handle this? And Chazal felt, by the way, that this was one of the 10 tests of Avraham. How he's going to handle the visitors was one of the 10 tests. It's going to demonstrate, was he worthy of being the founder of Klal Yisrael. When Avram saw these travelers, he stopped his encounter with Hashem, Chazal explain us. And he said, God, will you wait? Will you wait while I take care of these human beings who are visiting? How did God react? We know that he finally, when the visitors left, what does the pasuk in pasuk Chaf Beis say? Take a look in pasuk Chaf Beis. Go to 22 on page 82. Vayifnu misham ha'anashim ve'elchu Sodoma. They left and they went to Sodom. Va'Avraham odenu omeid lifnei Hashem. And he was still standing before God. What does that tell you? Hashem stood. Hashem waited. This led Chazal to teach us a crucial lesson in the Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph 127a. It's an unbelievably ethical lesson with an ethical impact. It says this story taught us that being hospitable to people is greater than being mekabel pnei hashchina, accepting the presence of the Almighty. Rather take care of your fellow man more than a conversation with God himself, which teaches us in Judaism, which is crucial, which is the most important lesson, important hachnasat orachim. But what hachnasat orachim? What type of hachnasat orachim? We're talking about hachnasat orachim, in other words, of a human being, right? Human being to human being is the most important lesson in Judaism. Even putting God on hold. God will wait. He wants us to take care of our fellow man. What a lesson, what a moral lesson. Like I gave you an introduction to this narrative in the Tanakh. Remember, the Rav is understanding that this is not just one moment in the life of Avraham. This story of how he received the angels is a lesson for eternity for the Jewish people. Hachnasas Orachim takes a very important role in the life of Avraham, and it's supposed to be impacting on us as well. Take a look. Now continue on. So developing this theory, this approach to the narrative, the Rav now takes a look at how does Avraham act? Well, let's take a look on Pasuk Dalet as he's building this story. Yukach no ma'at mayim, right? I'm going to please, a little water will be taken. Virachatzu raglechem, and you're going to wash your feet. Vishanu tachas ha'etz, and then you're going to lay behind the tree. You'll lean against the tree. What is going on here? Avram is not just associated with chesed. Avram is chesed, right? Avram represents chesed, but there's a very specific act of chesed that Avram becomes the master of, the model of, and that is hospitality. On the other hand, who's the foil? Sodom. Sodom is depicted in the words of Chazal, right? In all of the Midrashim and the Gemaras, it's depicted as the nation that refused Hachnasat Orachim at all costs. It's the matrix that defines their cruelty, correct? Hachnasat Orachim in Sodom wasn't heard of. It was against the law. It was like a law that you could not, according to Chazal, they depicted a law that you cannot receive any guests in your home. That's fascinating. Why is hospitality the demonstration of Avram's act of chesed? And why is it hospitality the matrix of cruelty for Sodom? What is it, in other words, in simple English? What is it about hospitality that is so important? And the Rav notes that when you give tzedakah to a poor person, to another person, you give him financial assistance. Are you doing an act of chesed? 100% you're giving an act of chesed. But is it the same as hachnasat orachim? No, not at all. The act of giving another person financial assistance when he needs it or when she needs it clearly demonstrates a sympathy. Why do I give to another person? I'm sympathetic. I'm sympathetic. I hear their story and I'm moved by their story. So I'm sympathetic. I demonstrate sympathy for another person. What does hospitality, the Rav, analytically demonstrates? He says it's totally different than sympathy. You know what Achnosas Arachim does? It treats the other human being as an equal. It infuses a dignity into your fellow man. He's invited to live in your home. He becomes a member of your inner circle, your household. By doing that, you give of yourself in a totality, right? You have to go way beyond your comfort zone to let another person in on your private Dalet Amos. That's what's happening here. In the words of the Rav, if I invite him in, that means that no matter what his station in life, I am treating him with respect. I am treating him as an equal. When you do Achnasas Arachim, what are you doing? The Rav notes, you're going beyond sympathy. You're treating the other fellow human being with ultimate dignity because he now becomes an equal to you. And there's a second consideration that we must note as well, the Rav says. When a Jew performs Hachnasas Orachim for another Jew, if you will, he demonstrates that he believes all Jews are B'nai Melachim. All Jews are princes, regardless of what that Jew owns or doesn't own, wealth or not wealth, right? Regardless if he's a big Talmid Chacham or he's an ignoramus, he's an Am Haaretz. It doesn't matter if he's knowledgeable or ignorant. By putting this story of the visitors visiting Avraham and how he welcomed them right here in the Torah, what is the Torah demonstrating? The moral lesson that we have to go the extra mile for our fellow human being, our fellow Jew in particular, right? That's what it's being taught. It's this, by placing this narrative here in the Chumash, what the Torah is teaching us is Achnasas Orachim becomes a paradigm of chesed that we are to emulate. Avraham literally masters it. It's not just, again, I repeat, it's not just an act of sympathy for another human being. It's a demonstration of treating another human being in a dignified and equal light. And that's what's being taught. That's why it's so important, this story, right? So how does he demonstrate his hospitality? What does he tell the travelers? The first exchange is Avram tells Avram, I want to stop for half a second and ask you a simple question. You're reading this text. Does Avram realize that they're Melachim? Not at all. He thinks they're nomads. Nomads like any nomad that comes around his tent. They're nomads constantly coming around his tent. He doesn't know who they are. And yet, he still opens his home to them. That's the godless. That's the greatness. So he doesn't know. Clearly, it indicates that he has no idea that they're divine angels at this juncture. Later, he realizes, oh, my guests are unique people. They're not people. They're angels, right? He perceived them right now as simple nomads that he encountered all the time. So what does he do? He asks them, wash your feet. Rashi, quoting the Medrash, says, why? Because he thought they were pagans. Pagans worshipped Avodah Zarah. What is Avraham so opposed to? What does Avraham stand for more than anything else? An opposition to paganism, an opposition to idolatry. He believes in Yud Kei Vav Kei, in the monotheistic God. He's telling them, clean yourself off. Get the dust of your worship off your feet when you come into my home. You're coming into my home, and that's also, by the way, just dawns on me right now as I'm teaching this to you. The Jew, we welcome everybody, but we don't give up our morals because of others, right? We keep our morals, we keep our laws. In other words, 100%, I want you to feel comfortable in my home. Understand, however, in my home, Avodah Zarah doesn't come in. Avodah Zarah doesn't come in. It doesn't cross my door, my door, my entrance. It doesn't. And he says to them, wash off your feet. He was telling them, clean yourselves off. He then tells them what? V'yishanu tachat ha'etz. What's v'yishanu tachat ha'etz? lean back, and where are you looking? You're looking up. So the Rav notes, Vishanu tachas ha'etz. Remember, Avraham was motivated to do what throughout his life? To teach monotheism to the world. So you know what he does? He says, lean back, gaze up, and you have a few minutes until I get your food ready. It's going to take us a little time. So I want you to ponder what's up in the heavens. I want you to think like I thought. I've been thinking about this since I've been in the Medrash since he was 3 years old. He looks up and he says, is it the stars? Is it the moon? Is it the sun that runs the world? And then he finally realizes, he comes to terms, there has to be a power that created all of that, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says, Chazal depict Avram as constantly teaching his belief in one God. Gaze up into the heavens, ponder the mystery of life. And who created all of it? He uses his kindness to impart his lessons, right? He's combining, he's welcoming them, and at the same time, it's teaching them. He's not preaching. That's interesting, right? Notice how he teaches. Vishanu tachas ha'etz. Look up, ponder, think. He places them in situations where they're going to have to come on their own to realize the uniqueness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't preach. He rather acts. He demonstrates how a moral life is a model life, in which we call today a Kiddush Hashem, correct? That's the ultimate in Kiddush Hashem. And so developing this whole theory, the Rav goes on and he says, okay, there's one more very important element to this story that's at the very beginning of this parsha. Now take a look. What happens in Pasuk? Where am I? And Pasuk Ches. Go now to one second. Why can't I? Oh, Pasuk Tes. I'm sorry. Pasuk Tes. Pasuk Tes. So fine. So the Pasuk, the Torah then continues on, and the Rav again is not analyzing like Rashi and the other Meforshim. He doesn't go word by word, pasuk by pasuk. That's not his point. He's giving you a gestalt. What's the next most important part of this story? Take a look in Pasuk Tes, page 80. Vayomru elav, and they say to him, who's the they? The angels, the visitors, the travelers. Elav, who's Elav? Avraham. And what do they ask him? Aye Sarah, Ishtecha. Where is Sarah, your wife? And how does he answer? 2 words, Hinei ba'ohel. What in the world is going on here? What kind of an exchange? Again, you're the Rav, right? You're developing this whole story, understanding what this parsha is teaching you, what moral lessons are. So we've developed all of the moral lessons so far in how he treats them with hospitality. But now something else happens. Then they have a conversation with him. They get fed, and they get a whole, we don't have to go, the Torah gives you the whole menu. Fine. They get a gewaltige, 10-course meal. They're getting quite an expensive and wonderful meal. Fine. Great. And then they turn to him and they say, Sarah Ishtecha, where's your wife? What kind of question is that? And why is this, if you will, that's the end of this, really, that's the end of this story, this part of the story of the hospitality, Sarah Ishtecha, right? Then the next part is Sarah laughing at the message that she's going to have a child. And what does that mean? That's another story. That's the Sarah story. But Sarah Ishtecha, if you had to parse out if I gave you these psukim and said, how many stories do you have in this first aliyah? You'd have to tell me 2 stories. There's the story of the visitors, namely hospitality, or I should say, there's the story of Abraham performing hospitality to the visitors. That's story 1. What's story 2? The Sarah hearing the news that she's going to have a son in a year from now, and how she responds. That's story number 2. Right before that, the last part of the first story, namely the visitors and Avraham performing hospitality, is this pasuk. Sarah Ishtecha, where is your wife? What are they simply asking? They want to know where the wife is? Who's sitting here? We know, we're the readers. Who's asking this question? Divine messengers, angels. Angels have a penetrating understanding. They don't have to find out where she physically is. So there has to be more than that's going on now. Is, they're sending a message to Avraham. Where is your wife? What are they simply asking? Give me. Okay, right. Okay. The angels had an insight that was penetrating, and they're sending a message to Avraham. They're telling Avraham that, Avraham, you're a leader, you're a teacher, you're a prophet, you're the outstanding personality of the time. But yet, you got to know something, Avraham. It's not just Avraham. Without your wife, you're not going to have a success in your mission. Where's your sidekick? That's what they're asking. Without her, who are you? So how does he answer? He says, do I not know this? What's Avram's answer? 2 words. Hinei ba'ohel. What's he responding? You hear the question. Their question is, do you know, Avram, that without her, you're really nothing? Who are you without her? And we want to see her. And he turns to them. He says, you're asking me if I know about my wife. If I realize the value of Sarah, I'll tell you something. You don't know my wife. Hinei ba'ohel. If you knew my wife, you'd understand how she was my partner in everything. She is ba'ohel. What does ba'ohel mean? She is a special woman. She is sanua, beyond sanua. He informs that Sarah was unusual because of her epitome of modesty. She's not a show-off. She's not interested in the spotlight. Just the opposite. She wants to be off stage. Where does she want to be? Behind, in the tent, where the community doesn't know her even. Anonymity is her calling. She's a woman of mystery, he informs them. You want to know who she is? Hinei ba'ohel. You have to know Sarah. And the Rav notes that this is correct way to read this story. This is the end of the story of the encounter with the angels, because Avram lived another 38 years after Sarah dies. What does he accomplish in those 38 years? Almost nothing. Yeah, he accomplishes 2 things. Number one, he accomplishes in the next Parshan Chaye Sarah, what are we going to learn? Maras HaMachpelah, right? 20 psukim on Maras HaMachpelah. And then the longest chapter in Chumash Bereshis is the next story, which is the finding of Yitzchak's partner, Rivka, right? Finding of a wife for Yitzchak. That, and he doesn't even do it. What does he do? He gets the motor running, right? And what happens after that? He lives another 38 years. What do we know about those 38 years? Yeah, at the very end of Chaim Yisrael, he remarries and to Keturah, and he has children. Huh? It's like basically nothing. Without Sarah at his side, he is no longer the great Avraham. That is true. And by the way, that is true with Yitzchak. With Yitzchak, when he no longer has Rivka at his side, Yitzchak basically disappears from the face of history. Not important. It's not recorded. And who else? Yaakov. When Rachel dies, he hands over the leadership to Yosef. Yaakov is no longer the real leader. It becomes the story of Yosef. As soon as Rachel dies, it's the story of Yosef. So each of our avos is not just an individual by himself, but rather it's a partnership with his wife. Avram with Sarah, Yitzchak with Rivka, Yaakov with Rachel. They are all partners in building Knesset Yisrael. And that is so important to this story. And that's how the Rav, again, Rav, I keep on repeating to you, don't expect the Rav to be a mafarish like Rashi. That's not what the Rav does. The Rav is interested in building a whole view of what the Torah is teaching us. What's the Torah teaching us in this story? In this story, in the first Aliyah, the story of the angels, He's teaching us, number one, a relationship that Hashem has with Avram, which is unique. Number two, how the Mila transformed Avraham, right? That's also a lesson here. Number three, why is hospitality the matrix of chesed? Because it is totally different than just doing an act of chesed. It's really giving the other human being dignity on the level that I consider him or her an equal to me. That's what hospitality demands, that I go out of my comfort zone. I'm welcoming them in to my household. I turn everything upside down, if you will, and from my private life, allowing others to be in my private Dalet Amos, right? That's what I said. And that becomes the matrix of who Avram is, and that becomes the example of what Sodom totally doesn't allow. As Sodom is the opposite. That's why this is, now we understand also, this is an understanding to the next story, right? This is the foil of Sodom. Avram is the opposite of Sodom. And interesting, that's where Lot broke off. That's why Lot has become such a depressing story, depressing figure in Tanakh, right? Because he rejects what Avram stands for, and he accepts to live with Sodom, and he becomes the unfortunate Lot, which is going to be the next story that we're going to learn as well. So that's how the Rav builds up and ends with Hayei Sarah Yishtecha, the lesson of the partnership between Avram and Sarah and the Avos and the Imahos. Okay, we'll pick up next week. Bezrat Hashem with Hayei Sarah. Yeah.
The word Hayei,
the
word Hayei,
yeah,
it's not just where,
right,
but the word where has many meanings, because is it she just physically here?
right,
Or is she something else?
right.
Or that she's
That is what's happening here. Clearly, the Rav is noting it's not just tell me geographically where she is. This were Malachim who had a penetrating understanding. Hayei Sarah, do you know who your wife is? Do you understand who your wife is? And he answers, yeah, I understand who my wife is. Do you understand my wife? Hine ba'ohel. Just 2 words. That's all he responds. He says, I get my wife. My wife isn't interested at all in the public domain. She will perform all of who she is in mystery, if you will, in tzniut. She has enormous influence. And that's who Sarah was, right?
And this is why it says Akeret Habayit.
That's right.
The ikar, the importance of.
That's right. I'll show you something. I put this on the podcast when we just taped for Hayei Sarah. Take a look. Just quickly, I'll show you something very interesting. Who is she? Vayiyu Hayei Sarah. Vayiyu. What is the gematria? 37. If you take a look, 37 is Vayiyu. She was 37 years a mother to Yitzchak. How does she define who she is? How does she define who she is? She defines who she is as the mother of Yitzchak. That's who Sarah is. Sarah's real purpose in life was to be the mother to Yitzchak, and that's how she creates her influence. Vayu Hayei Sarah. Interesting, right? Vayu is, Ibn Kaspi points that out. Anyhow, okay. Next week. This week is going to be on Vayera. Next week, tomorrow, Thursday, you're going to get, tomorrow you're going to get this podcast on this week's Parsha. The next week, you'll get the next one. Yeah. Okay, we'll pick up next week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, everybody. No, not at all. Don't be sorry.